My name is Charlie Sand, and this is the final part of my story. Oh, where was I now? Yes, I remember now. We could hear their horns as the diesels approach. We were shocked to see Mavis and Daisy rounding the bend with a fuel tanker, van, and brake van. The ladders were filled with workmen and civilians from Farquhar. Mavis had a truck shield similar to Henry, and Daisy had wooden planks and boards covering her windows, and instead of the makeup which she typically donned on her face, was replaced with dirt and grim. The two diesels were shocked at what they had strolled in on, and Edward quickly explained everything to them. Mavis in turn explained how the quarry was attacked by several armed men. She managed to escape and found Daisy trapped in her shed due to some jammed points. Once fixed, they continued up the branch and stopped once they heard us. We were all glad to know they were alright. However, Thomas didn't say a word. He just stared at the remains of Toby. We quickly moved him away and into the sheds. We didn't want Thomas to do anything drastic. We're probably going to head back to Kildane to meet with Henry in a few hours, so I'll make an update then. Just before we were about to leave, we heard the sound of an all too familiar two-toned whistle, and there was Douglas rounding the bend. Before we could say hello, he frantically asked, "Where's Donnie?" Edward explained how we passed him on the 4th and haven't seen him since. Douglas grew sad but was determined to keep searching. Just then we heard the sound of slow, deep chuffing. We were horrified to see a concerned Oliver roll beside the Caledonian. Douglas explained how he found Oliver roaming around the island by himself. Edward yelled for Douglas to run, but it was too late. Oliver's face fell off, revealing his true colors. Douglas screamed at the sight and managed to get out of the way as Oliver lifted himself off the ground and attacked. Mavis acted fast and ran over one of the legs, causing the creature to stumble and fall into the yard. Mavis and Daisy yelled for people to get into the trucks. We managed to set off down the line away from Tidman's sheds just in time. We managed to find Douglas at Elsbridge, and he was completely shell-shocked. He didn't say a word to any of us, no matter how hard we tried. We then heard Oliver's whistle and knew he was on our tails, so we wasted no time and buffered up to Douglas and pushed him away from the creature he saved all those years ago. We've arrived back at Kildane, and thankfully Henry is still here. Topham's busy interrogating one of the men Mavis's crew managed to capture at the quarry. While he's doing that, we've been working on a plan of action. Some of us just want to leave the island and save who we can, while others want to stay and finish Oliver. I'll make an update on our plan later. I think I hear Topham arguing with that man. It sounds like it's getting pretty heated, so I'm going to see what's going on. Well, that took an unexpected turn. As soon as I got up, Topham threw the man outside of the hut. The man laughed, saying, "It's no use, Fathead. We've already won." Topham grabbed the guy by the collar of his shirt and pulled him close. "Who did this?" Topham yelled. The man just stared at Topham and a grin overtook his face. "Peter Theodore Boomer, can't wait to see you in hell." He was then cut off by Topham, who shot him right between the eyes. His body fell to the ground and Topham wiped the blood off his face and coat. He then walked away back to the hut. The engines just looked at the body of the man. They had no idea Topham could be so ruthless. Alright, here's the plan. We're going to split up into two groups. The first half shall consist of Douglas, Mavis, and Daisy. This group shall head to Brandham, as based on what Topham got from the man, Boko and Donald are being held captive there, while we and Henry shall head off to the ironworks to finish off Oliver, as Henry claimed it to be its nest. Finally, Thomas shall stay back, as we don't want to risk him getting hurt. We'll enact this plan tomorrow, but as for now, we're going to get some sleep. I noticed Thomas crying quietly to Annie and Clarabelle. I moved Edward over to him and they began talking like father and son. Thomas was heartbroken at the fact he lost his two closest friends and didn't even get to say goodbye. Edward comforted the tank engine and promised that they would find Henrietta. "Edward, if I die, promise me you'll take care of Annie, Clarabelle, and Henrietta." Edward snapped back, saying he wouldn't let anyone near him, but Thomas persisted. Edward eventually gave in and promised. After that, we said our goodnights and went off to bed. I'm still worried about tomorrow and whether or not I'll make it to see my wife again. Alright, we're ready. We've got the cavalcade set up and everyone ready to go. Douglas was all riled up. He wants to save his twin. We quickly said our goodbyes to Thomas and the few who decided to stay behind and set off. As we diverted off the main line and onto the Peel Godred, Henry and Edward let off several farewell whistles to the Brandham group. They replied and soon disappeared into the distance. We traversed the branch for what felt like hours, and the whole time I knew Edward was scared. We all were. We pulled into the ironworks to find Toad and Scruffy sitting outside the smelting shed. We were surprised to see that they were still alive. However, before we could pester them with questions, we heard a deep, slow chuff. Oliver rolled out of the shadows and looked concerned. As we all stared at him, the sound of clapping was heard. We looked up at the scaffolding, and there was the man behind it all, Peter Theodore Boomer. Topham jumped from Henry's cab and called out to him, but he didn't give a reply. Boomer just snapped his fingers, and before we could think, the beast blasted its whistle and rammed into Scruffy. The truck screamed as he was pulled back into the depths of the shed. The sound of splintering wood and tearing of flesh was clearly heard. Topham went to the ladder and made his way up to where Boomer was. All of us soon emerged once again, now covered in the old truck's blood. We were frozen in fear and didn't know what to think. Then Henry blew his whistle and heaved forward. We surged towards the beast and slammed into it hard. It soon turned into an all-out brawl as the workmen jumped from the trucks and vans and shot at Oliver, while Topham was up in the scaffolding duking it out with Boomer. Sydney then called out saying someone had climbed onto Edward's footplate. I immediately jumped from the cab and saw the man injecting a syringe into Edward's face. No sooner had I gotten there, the man was shot dead. Edward screamed in pain as his eye and the surrounding skin bubbled and boiled. I knew there was only one way to stop the mutation. I grabbed a sharp piece of nearby metal, and before Edward understood what was happening, I jabbed it into his eye. He screamed in pain as I pulled the mutated flesh from his face. By the time I had finished, a whole portion of his face had been removed, and Edward was out of breath. We then heard a massive crash followed by a roar, and I turned around to see Henry had been derailed. Henry screamed as the beast lunged a tendril, but before the beast could finish Henry off, Sydney set Edward's whistle off long and loud. The beast looked towards us and slowly made its way over. I ran back to the cab and set Edward into reverse, and we began to roll slowly away. Toad screamed and yelled for Oliver to stop, but was only met with being thrown off the line by the beast. As we turned into a siding, we came to a sudden halt as we buffered up to the remains of Duck. All of us stopped outside of the siding and just stared at us. Blood dripped from its frames and an arm fell from its mouth. The beast began to scream and roar, and that was when I knew we were about to die. I sealed my eyes, awaiting my fate, when an all too familiar two-toned whistle was heard, soon followed by a Scottish scream. "For you, Donny!" Douglas shouted as he raced into view with a long line of fuel tankers. The beast let out a scream and raced back in an attempt to escape. They raced into the smelting shed and Douglas applied his brakes, launching the tankers forward. Topham saw his chance and shoved Boomer over the railing, causing him to fall on top of Oliver's cab. Douglas quickly reversed as the force of Oliver and the tankers broke the buffers and sent them into the fires below. The resulting explosion shook the ground and Douglas flew backwards out of the shed. The intensity of the explosion destroyed the ironworks and made all of us roll back, all except Henry, who remained off the rails. Many moments passed, but afterwards, we all breathed a sigh of relief, finally having a feeling of contentment after so long. It was finally over. The fallout had affected us in ways we never could have imagined, and we suddenly heard coughing coming from nearby. It was Boomer, having been blown out by the explosion, heavily injured on the rails. Topham walked up and aimed his pistol at him, determined to end it, but at the last moment he decided he could not bring himself to kill what was once one of his closest friends. Instead, he lowered his pistol and walked out of the way, leaving Boomer to watch in horror and disbelief as two of his own creations, Boko and Mavis, ran him down, mutilating his body and killing him instantly. We all sat there deciding what to do next, until Edward mentioned we should do what James tried to do in the early stages of the fallout, heading to the mainland bridge. Now that both Boomer and the Beast were dead, we wouldn't be facing any interference. But first things first, we had to re-rail Henry. With Douglas and Edward's combined efforts, they pulled Henry back onto the rails. He had 2 flat tires, but there was no time for a trip to the works. After I fixed a bandage made from a tarp over Edward's wound, he assumed the lead of the train. Topham climbed into the cab, and with that we headed back to Tidmouth to meet up with Thomas, James, and the coaches. We made it back to Tidmouth to find Thomas and James around a fire pit, so we gathered and Boko explained what happened at Brendam. Boko stated they arrived to witness, he had a hard time saying this, the death of Donald. He died by boiler explosion. It was horrific and Douglas was and is traumatized by what happened. Their drivers and firemen made quick work of Boomer's men, and in the end they had a reason to smile because they had found James. The team left in a huge hurry to come help us. We spent the rest of the night telling each other better stories that made us laugh and remember the good old days. We all knew in the coming days that there was a massive rebuild ahead of us, along with a search for survivors. The search for survivors began. We found many of our friends such as Harvey. Others didn't turn out as healthy as others, such as Bill and Ben, who needed face surgery to remove mutated tissue. Thomas went on a mission of his own to Crovan's Gate to find Henrietta. He returned a few days later and he had Henrietta. They soon became inseparable as Thomas planned to carry out Toby's dying wish as long as his wheels would carry him. The next day he got face surgery. They removed the awful eye sac and third eye. They also managed to repair the damaged eye. Thomas looked like his old self again, but with a couple scars. Thomas never left Henrietta, and they are still together even to this very day. Time pressed on and things started to return to normal on Sodor. People and the engines were happy again, and Sodor began to feel like home as everything came back to life. Sidney retired as a fireman and moved to the mainland to start a new job. I'm not sure what happened to him after that because we became distant. After a while, Bertram Topham Hatt retired due to him getting up there in years. It was 1983 and he requested that I be his replacement. I told him I would be honored, and I was the controller of Sodor for a wonderful 10 years before I passed the mantle on to Bertram's grandson, Stephen Topham Hatt. He was a great young man with a wonderful future ahead of him. Not long after this, I retired with my wife Rachel, and before long I learned my son Edward. Yes, I named my son Edward after that wonderful blue steam engine. He had been promoted to steam engine driver, and the engine he had been assigned to was none other than Edward. Call it fate, call it destiny, but I tell you it was meant to be. My, does time fly. It's July 4th, 2023. I am 80 years old. I am an old man, but I am happy. I got Rachel, I'm healthy, I'm strong, and I feel like I got another 50 years left in me. I am glad to have written this novel for you all, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all. Sincerely, Charlie Sand.
Hello.
Dear Charlie, if you're reading this, I did it. I changed it all for you, for Sodor right from the very beginning. Remember the journal you got when we were kids? The lady tried to give it to me at first. Remember, but I said no and insisted you take it. The journal has magical properties that I can't explain. This was the biggest change I made. I changed history because the journal was mine, the first time around. Why would I change it all, you ask? Well, you see, if I'm the hero of the story, then everybody on Sodor dies. So I gave everything to you, Charlie, and I mean everything, including the woman I loved, Rachel. She's better off with you. I know she's happy, but time had other plans and tried to steal her from you. So I made some more changes to make sure you and her both had your happy ending together. You're wondering how did I travel through time? Let's just say I am part of Secret Time Police. We protect the timeline from threats that would do it harm. Take care, old friend, and keep her safe. Your old friend, Sidney.